Welcome to the podcast for real-life heroines. Let's embark on a journey that unveils the extraordinary stories of everyday women who redefine what it means to be a heroine or hero. Life is a tapestry of inspiration and magic, and today's episode is no exception. Here's your host, Susanna Liller.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to my podcast for real life heroines. Really glad you're here. You're in for a treat today. We're going to be speaking with Barb Babkirk. Welcome, Barb.
Thank you. Really nice to be here.
I will tell you about Barb, her career and her lofty credentials, but I also want to tell you Barb Babkirk is a dear friend. And we have been friends on many different heroines' journeys, adventures, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But let me just tell you a bit about my friend, Barb Babkirk. Who she is, her title is Master Career Counselor. And she's former owner of Heart at Work Associates, and which is still, for now, an innovative career counseling and outplacement firm in Portland. And is that right, Barb? Still is?
No, I closed the business last year.
Okay.
I am still working solo in doing executive outplacement through this year.
Okay, so thank you for that. So this year, she's phasing into retirement from her work at Heart at Work and involved coaching clients to recognize and exercise their options as they negotiated job offers or severance, proposed new roles, and articulated their professional value for career transition. So all of that can be summed up, I think, into helping people with transition, what their transition is, but in different ways. Barb is a native to Maine, actually somebody who was born here. She chose to return after living in Boston and abroad. Her commitment has been to strengthen Maine's workforce by guiding individuals to positions that align with their skills and life stage priorities. And I think I should, in all transparency, say she's helped me with that. She's a master. She's an ardent supporter of women in the workplace. I think that's kind of how we initially got connected. Barb served as president of the board of the Maine Women's Fund and Caring Unlimited, and she was a board member of Women Working Together, as was I. She now lives in Cape Elizabeth with her husband and close by to her daughter and grandson, which I'm very jealous of because mine are far away. So again, welcome.
Thank you.
And I need to just tell people that one of those, and I won't dwell on it, but it was a big, big, wonderful part of my time with Barb, was taking women on retreats in France. So Barb is a Francophile. She knows France. She's been there many, many times. And I got lucky one year, and I don't remember what year, maybe 2011.
Maybe.
She reached out and said, Susanna, I need a facilitator to help with this retreat that we're doing in Provence, in a little town called Biot. I had never been in France, and I absolutely jumped on it and ended up, I mean, it opened the door for me to such a wonderful experience being with these women and with Barb in this most beautiful location. And it led to more trips, and then it led to, oh, why don't we do this in Paris? And we'll go to Chartres Cathedral and we'll walk the labyrinth there. And yeah, we've had some great, great times and adventures.
We have. Amazing.
Yeah. So we don't do that any longer, but, and every now and then I sort of poke her and say, Barb, you wanna, and she kind of shakes her head because she has other things she's doing. And I think we're gonna touch on, maybe, if you'll let me, your newest hobby at the end today. But people have tuned in, I'm sure, because, and the reason why I so much wanted you on this show was because of your work as a career counselor and helping people find their next career or their next job is just so important now in today's economy. And so I have several questions for you, and I'm gonna kind of jump around, but what and how many years, tell me, how many years have you been a career counselor, master career counselor?
Well, I jumped into it right after grad school because I was asked to be an intern. We had to do practicums in counseling program. And I was asked to do this with a woman who just gotten her doctorate in career development. I didn't even know what it was. And I fell in love with that concept.
Right.
And the work was so varied, and I got to do workshops as well as one-on-one, and that got me started. So that was 30 years ago. And then I worked for Bowdoin and UNH, and then eventually started my own business.
So 30 years of doing this work, helping people.
Yes.
Yeah. So think back, this is probably an impossible question, but what have you enjoyed the most about that work?
Mm.
And you talk about falling in love with it. So what was that made you fall in love with it?
Well, I'm never really tired of it. And that's a really good question. Why? What did I love about it? I think that the fact that every encounter I had with a person was different. Now, there were similarities, and we can talk about that later, but their stories were all different. And what they needed was slightly different. How I engaged with them was different. I never followed a particular script for working with people. It's just not my nature to do that. So it was always customized. So never boring, ever. It was great. I think that the variety has kept me focused.
I think too, with your mind that I know, problem solving was an engaging thing for you because each person in their situation is a new problem to help them with.
Yes. And I think that over the years, and you know this as a guide and facilitator, over the years, you realize that people do know how to solve their own problems. They need the right questions. And so as they're talking to me, and often a person will say, "Oh, I'm giving you too much information. Oh, I'm boring you." And I say, "Not at all. I'm taking it in, I'm listening, and then I'll come up with a few questions, and that gets them going." So yes, problem solving, helping them solve their problems or their questions.
So I'm wondering if that love had to do with the name, hard, because it's an unusual name. Most of your company, former company, most, you would think it would be transition associates or new careers associates, Heart at Work. Can you tell us about how the name came to you?
I can. I remember it vividly. I was on a plane on my way to Minnesota to visit a dear friend, and I was reading one of those magazines they have stuffed in the pocket, and the title of the article was Heart at Work. And I said, "Wow." And I knew I was starting my business, and I didn't have a name for it. And it was all about the fact that most of us work hard, and hard at work is more typical than heart at work. And what I wanted to do was really help people listen to their heart as well as their head. And it just said to me, this is the name of the business. And some people over the years, coaches that I've worked with, have suggested I change the name, to my initials or something, and I wouldn't even hear of it. And it has served me well, because if a person's turned off to the name, they shouldn't be working with me. But I've had a lot of clients, so it really, I think, resonated with a lot.
I know. So because this is a podcast about the heroine's journey,
Mm,
about someone who is what we say an ordinary life, going about their normal routine and gets an urge, an inkling, something, sometimes it's a whack on the head to make a change and do something different. And then we say, then if they respond to that call, then they cross a threshold and do something new and evolve and learn a lot as a result. I'm wondering if you can identify what that moment might have been for you in the beginning when you said, hey, I'm going to start a business and I'm going to look for a name. Can you even think about how that happened? Did you get a call?
mm. My mother died.
Uh,
My mother died. I was living in France. My husband was on sabbatical. And I was torn about whether to come home for the funeral, believe it or not, because she was ill when I left, and I had already kind of said goodbye. And I thought, well, I can't see her again. But I decided I would go back home, and my husband and daughter would stay in France. And the next morning, I was to fly out on Air France, and the pilots went on strike for one day.
Mm.
Shut the airline down. I couldn't leave. So that was that. And I started thinking about possibilities and what was in my way. And I was having lunch with my husband one day. It was in Camden. And I said, I think I'm going to quit working where I was working and open my own business. And I did it and never looked back. It was the right choice for me.
And just because I always ask this, was it a scary thing for you that, oh no, what am I going to do? And how am I doing this? Or was it just, this is what I'm going to do?
I don't remember it being scary. I already had some clients that had contacted me. I believed in what I was doing. I knew that there weren't that many people doing it, and certainly no one doing it the way I do. Everyone does it differently. So I don't remember it being all that scary.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting that the situation with your mom and losing your mom kind of was the catalyst. And I can't tell you how many women I've talked to and men, when they tell me about the beginnings of their journey, it starts with somebody close to them passing away. It's a big call to do something, or at least to look at your life, right? And
Right.
it says it.
Yes.
And this reminds me, which I have to share. I remember being on a Air France plane with you, leaving France after a retreat. And I was in sort of I don't know what to do spot. I think about leaving the consulting company. I'm not sure where we talked about it. And you said, Susanna, why don't you plot out your heroine's journey steps and where you've been? I don't know if you remember. And I took down the table and I began to chart it. I still have it. And it really did help me.
Mhm.
I put myself on the map, the heroine's journey map. Yeah.
I love that. Put myself on the map. Love it.
Helps you figure out where you are situationally.
Mm-hmm.
So you have helped over those 30 years. I mean, countless people, many people. And they're either in transition, somehow want new careers, or maybe they're stuck the way I was stuck on that plane. I bet that you can think of some consistent themes that just the way I said, oftentimes it's the death of a loved one that prompts a heroine's journey. Can you identify some themes in people you've worked with?
One of the themes that comes to mind is, so a person they're telling me about their career, what they've done, places they've worked. And they often begin by saying, oh, well, it's kind of random. It was all random. It was happenstance. I landed there. And I kind of believed that at first. And now what I realize is it's not totally that way. That when I asked them the question of, and I just did this recently with someone who had very disparate professional landings, I will say, in the career world. And when I asked the question of, okay, well, I'd like you to think about the positions you've held, and even the ones you held as summer jobs. What was the glue that held them together? What was it that you brought to those positions that was consistent? And you think, well, are they going to be able to answer that question? That sounds like a very lofty question. Oh, they can answer that question because most of the people know themselves at that level. They can say, well, I get things done and I do this and I do it this way and they're able to tell me. And I'll say, well, was that true for most of these positions? And they'll think and they'll say, it was true for all of them. And I said, well, people often fret over, what's the role I'm looking for next? What's the title I want to go after? And these days, we all know there are so many titles doing the same thing, zany titles. That doesn't really help necessarily. What helps is knowing what you bring to the table, knowing what your strengths are, and being able, not only knowing, but being able to articulate them. Women in particular, but certainly I've seen it in men, they want to be modest. Don't talk about yourself. Well, that's not going to help you in a job interview. So we really need to get over that and claim what is ours and have examples. So that's a consistent theme. They think, oh, I just landed there and there wasn't anything that was consistent. That's typically not true. I don't even know if it's ever true, to be honest.
It's so important, knowing what you bring to the table and being able to articulate it. Really important. I remember you giving me the book, Women Don't Ask. And I wonder if there's something that has, being too modest, not being able to say, this is what I bring, afraid to ask questions. Yeah.
Well, I think it used to be, I don't know how long ago, I want to say quite a while ago, that men would ask for a raise or they would interview for a job and they would negotiate, I want $5,000 more, and it was hardly questioned. Of course, I have to pay the mortgage and feed the kids. Well, that isn't the reason now. It's not enough. You don't even say that. What you say is you have to justify what you're asking for. And I think most people, I don't know about most, but many people don't think to do that. They offered me a job and it pays money. Okay, great. But you need to take into account, in my opinion, what is the marketplace paying for that job? So you do research. And then what is it that you bring? Do you bring entry-level skills? Do you bring intermediate skills? Do you bring executive skills? And that equates to money. So if you ask for X dollars more, then you justify it. But on the other hand, I remember a colleague telling me that she had a client who got an offer for a job that she wanted, and the salary was fabulous. And she was so delighted. She wasn't going to negotiate. And I think that's fine. And she'd done her research. She goes home, she talks to her partner. Her partner says, oh my gosh, they really want you. You can ask for a lot more. She asked for $20,000 more, and they took the offer away. There was no justification. She was being offered something, a salary very consistent with the marketplace and her skills. So it's important to really do the research and know what you're doing.
What's another theme that you kept running into with people?
I think the idea of, I don't know what I'm going to do next. I don't know. So someone loses their job. Oh, I don't know what I'm going to do next. Although I found, I would say much more than 50% of the people who lose their jobs thought about it first. They just didn't act on it. It may have been a surprise that they were laid off, but they had been musing about it before. So that's definitely a theme. They just didn't, for all kinds of reasons, didn't have the courage or didn't, whatever, the time wasn't right to resign. That's a scary thing. That's a very courageous thing to do. So the company did it for them.
I was wondering if you're going to bring that up, because I've run into that with people as well, that they would come to me and complain about what they didn't like about their existing job. And then the next thing I know, they're coming back and saying, I got fired. So kind of,
Yeah.
yeah.
And important to differentiate being fired from laid off. I hear people say, and you know that, people say they were fired, and I said, the company would not have paid for you to work with me and given you a severance if you had done something egregious, and that's why a person's fired. So, because they have that in their mind, and it impacts their self-esteem and their self-confidence. So I try and get that straight from the get-go.
And I would assume that so much of your work has been making sure that people have the confidence and don't lose their self-esteem. And so often your job is tied to your identity, and you're probably building that up for them to make sure that they don't lose any of that in the transition.
But they do. And you're right, I help them build it up. And how long that will take depends on the individual. I mean, it typically doesn't take a huge amount of time. And I find that once they start to think about a new direction, and there are things to do in order to get on that path, then the self-confidence starts to build, and what happened starts to wane.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you can even put a timeline to it, how long it usually takes for you to receive somebody, hear what's going on, go through those options, sort of turn them around. Is that a year they would spend with you, or 3 months, or?
Never a year. I would say that it depends on how quickly they're willing to begin the work. If they are right at it, then I would say they start to shift their attitude and their focus within weeks. I'd say within 3 sessions. And then they start talking to people and talking about what they did, and their self-confidence starts to build. And then when they actually land a job depends on, of course, the marketplace. It depends on the level of employment. It depends on how willing they are to talk to people they have in their network. Some people are very shy and introverted, and they don't want to do that. So I work really hard to help them shift that and try to make it easy for them. And I use LinkedIn all the time as a way to help them find alums from their schools that they can talk to. And they say, oh, but Barb, I don't give to my college. And I said, you already did.
Yeah, probably a lot. Yes.
For 4 years you did. So don't worry about that. No, it's about being part of a club. It doesn't really matter what school. Some people say, oh, it wasn't an Ivy, it wasn't a great school. Doesn't matter. People still feel akin to you because you went to the same school. You had similar experiences.
And so the work you're talking about, when you say if they're willing to do the work, that's getting out there, talking to people, networking. Is that what you're basically talking about?
Yes, it initially it's depending on where they are in the process, I might have them do the Myers-Briggs, which is a personality assessment, to help them understand why the job wasn't working for them, because there's very few people who are let go for whom the job was great. Now, if the company was acquired, that's a whole other thing, right? It had nothing to do with them. It's there was redundancy in the workforce, and they said, I have, 2 marketing managers, goodbye. So it just depends. But the work for them is doing their homework I always give things for people to do. They enjoy that. It's part of a plan. Otherwise, they're sitting and ruminating over the fact they were laid off or they don't like their job or whatever. So one of the things I also do is have them rewrite their resume right away. It's not because I think they're going to apply for a job right away, but because it's important to go over what they've done and to really be clear about the skills they use, because they'll need to give those examples during an interview. Then eventually, and then it comes LinkedIn, which is a whole piece that's so important these days. And then after that, we use LinkedIn to find people that they will talk to. And I call it strategic conversations because they have an agenda. And it's not, can you give me a job? Because who can do that? I mean, 1 out of 100, maybe. So they have an agenda about what they want from that meeting. And that's what they have in their mind.
And that goes back to what you said, that you have to know what you bring to the table and articulate it. Yeah.
Yes, as opposed to, oh, do you know of any COO jobs available or any manager of whatever? No, that isn't important because the title, it might be another job that you're going for. That someone says, oh, well, we have a position and it calls for those skills. Why don't you apply for it? It's a different title than you've had, but that's okay. You have the skills.
Right. Right. I can only imagine how helpful this is for people to hear these things from someone who for 30 years has been helping people with this. So this is great, Barb. So I'm going to switch it back to you a little bit. And I can say to you that probably 3 years ago, maybe 4, I was talking and might have asked you the question about, so when are you going to retire, Barb? And you kind of pounced on me, and I don't like that word, Susanna. We don't retire. And I'm not going to say anymore. I'm going to ask you. So tell me your feelings about that word and why that brought up that emotion for you.
Well, it probably brought up the emotion because I was thinking about it, but I didn't want to. But also, people who were born 46 to 64, they're called boomers, we're among them. We really are reinventing retirement for a couple of reasons. One, we're living 30 years longer, so there's much more time to be and to do, whether that's in the marketplace or not. And I know, when my father and mother retired, they did not want to work anymore. They did not want to do anything for pay. It was like done. My dad wanted to fish. So that's not what I'm seeing. In fact, I think it was Merrill Lynch did a study a few years ago that showed that 3 out of 5 people who retire, that means they leave their paid job or career, 3 out of 5 go back to work in some capacity. Not typically full-time. It could be part-time, it could be project work, it could be a year kind of gig. But that happens. And that didn't happen a generation ago. It just didn't. And you think, well, what's wrong with the economy that they have to do that? It's typically not about money. Of course it is for some, but for most people, it's about purpose. They get bored and they need a reason to get up in the morning.
And making a contribution still, I think, is part
Exactly.
of it. Yeah. So how about this? Here you are. I don't know if I can say, would you say you're on the cusp of retiring, or have you just, no, yeah, you're still taking on some clients.
So this is my last year. So this is August, almost September. And I'm very aware, I mean, I would not take on a new client in December. I want to be true to myself, and it's taken me 3 years. And I sent out, when I closed Hard at Work, I sent out a note, a letter to former corporate clients and colleagues. And this year has been pretty busy, surprisingly. But I've given myself the time because people will say, Barb, I thought you were retiring. I am. I am. And now I realize it's true, I am. This is the year, not 3 years ago when I thought I was ready, but I wasn't ready. So I think it's something that people really need to, I mean, there are a lot of factors. I know financial is one of them, and not everyone can make their own choice. They have to stay working even if they don't want to. But if that isn't a consideration, then it's really important to take the time you need to make the decision. And for me, I felt it. It wasn't my head telling me. My head was telling me, oh, you can retire. That was 3 years ago. Go ahead, retire. I wasn't ready. And part of that has to do with the fact that I really, really have loved the work.
Right. So you were having to kind of let go and say goodbye to what you had been doing, and before you really felt ready. Yeah.
Well, I thought I did. Right. I thought I did. But I realized, well, I don't have to retire right now, and I won't. And I didn't. But now I feel ready. I feel joyful about it.
Mhm.
And it's a feeling more than my head telling me.
So your advice is, I'm thinking what you're saying to us is, it's because of course this is going to apply to me in
Yes.
2 or 3
You do.
or 4 or 5. No, I don't know. But everybody has a different timetable, and you'll know. And I would think for me too, it will be a feeling that, okay, this is the time, more than,
Yes.
yeah.
It was absolutely that. And even though I know that to be true, when it happens to you, like, oh my gosh, really? The clarity was, it was there.
Mhm. So then what's next?
Hmm.
Are you going to retire to Provence and have a villa and
Mm.
sip wine on the patio? And probably that's
With my friend Susanna.
I'll be there.
Well, I always thought, my husband and I always thought that we'd be living in France part of the year. And then we had a grandson. And I don't want to be away from him that long. And so we travel to France often, twice a year now. And that's great. And it may be longer when he, is older. So what am I going to do? Well, unexpectedly. Well, I thought what I was going to do. I thought I was going to have a plan because I'm quite planful. And I thought, well, we've done quite a lot of we've given quite a lot of support to several immigrants, and they've just done fabulously, and they're just on their way to wonderful things. And I thought, well, the immigrants, they don't know the first thing about coming to America and applying for a job. How would they? I wouldn't know that in Kenya. So I said, well, that's what I'll do. I'll just transfer my skills to another population as a volunteer. And I thought that's what I would do. But that's not what I'm going to do, at least not for the moment. Through a friend asking me to help her with something, I became very interested. I even to say it, it's like, really? In vintage costume jewelry. Seriously? Never in my life have I even thought of that.
I have something to say to you about it, because it's just like when you talked about people say, I don't know, I just happened to land on this thing. And then you have them think back as to what they were good. And I know you are a very creative person, and I know you love beauty. And that certainly factors into your fascination with this new.
It does. It does. It's not entirely out of the blue. It's like, what are the threads that connect with my life? And you're right, beauty, because while we're not talking about emeralds and diamonds, we're talking about craftsmanship that is phenomenal. So it has my attention. And what I will exactly do, I'm not sure. But right now I'm helping a neighbor. She has a collection and she needs to get rid of it, and I'm helping her with that. And that's helping, and it feels good because she couldn't do it alone.
And I think there's a message in that too, that we can be thinking, this is what's next. I know it. And then zoom, something comes in that you didn't expect. Yeah.
Right. And to give into it, I think, is the other thing. And that surprises me a little bit because I had a plan, supposed to follow the plan, but it wasn't, my heart wasn't in it for the moment.
You're following your heart. Yes.
I'm following my heart.
Barb, we have had such a great conversation, and I'm going to be letting you go to have your weekend. However, I have one more question for you. And it's about all this information. It's a lot to take in. People will be listening, but they'll go off and have their weekend. I'm wondering if they would only remember one thing that you had to say, what would you want them to remember?
As trite as it may sound, I think it is give room in your process for what your head says, but also what your heart and your gut say. Notice that. Notice. And so that means you need to slow down a bit to listen and to hear what's going on. And trust your timing.
Yeah, such good advice. Thank you so very much for being with us today and sharing your wisdom. And of course, I'm sure everyone, including me, wishes you a great bon voyage on your next venture. Maybe we'll all be buying vintage costume jewelry.
You might. Wonderful.
And I want to thank people listening. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you will join me next month. And I wish you fair seas and good luck on your heroine's journey. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the podcast for Real Life Heroines. Your time and presence mean the world to us. If you're hungry for more inspiration and ready to craft your own heroine story, connect with Susanna outside of the show. Visit SusannaLillard.com to discover her courses and programs designed to empower you on your journey. Until next time, may your days be filled with the courage and strength of a true heroine. Stay inspired.